Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hello, and welcome to You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm glad you joined me today. I have Janet Carter on the line. She is a speaker, writer, and certified leadership parent coach. She's taught middle and high school English. She homeschooled her own 4 children, and she also works with children's ministry at her church. And she has some experience with working with parents of children with disabilities or other issues. I'm very glad to have her on today. Welcome, Janet.
Oh, thank you. It's my privilege to be here.
So today, Janet and I are going to talk about parenting a child who has disabilities or other diagnosis or issues. It seems like today there are a lot of families out there that have kids that are either on the autism spectrum, they have ADHD, ADD, that's attention deficient disorder or attention hyperactive deficient disorder. They have other learning disabilities, other things that kind of can impact the way they learn, the way they interact with the world. Do you think that there's been more kids with those types of issues or disabilities these days? It seems like when I was a kid, I didn't really know anyone who had those kind of issues. So I'm wondering, what's your take? Why does it seem to have more? Are we more aware of what's going on?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that without question, there's a different style of parenting going on, whether it's good or bad. I can't completely say one way or the other, but there is definitely kids are more scheduled and they are more, shall I say, taught. They have less free time, less time for their little brains to explore on their own. That might be a factor in it, as I'm a big believer in free play and the power it has in preparing a mind to learn. Our food is different, our water is different, there's so much more technology. Kids are on screens more. I think there's just any number of things that affect how we see our children, and then the increased, medical or educational attention to it.
Right, and I think that, I think you're right. I think there are a whole host of factors, and while that can make parenting or raising kids seem more daunting, I also think that it can help us make, if we're aware of it, help us make better choices for our children. And not that, every choice we make is going to be good or bad for our kids. But I think that, free play is a great example, having that downtime. I think we've just kind of forgotten how kids' brains really grow and what really kind of impacts them. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think you've done some research or study on that on your own.
Well, I think that parents, we are very much a parenting culture that is educational driven, and we're academically driven, and we're activity and achievement driven. And I don't necessarily think that those things are bad or wrong, but somehow in the process, leaving a child alone just for free play has kind of lost favor. And I think many parents feel like if a child is just sitting and playing, they use the word just as if it was nothing. And yet I think children were born to play. I think play is where they develop thinking skills. And I think play are the seeds in the ground that prepare a child to understand the words that they're going to get hit with later on in school. But I think in today's culture, they frequently are hit with a lot of words and a lot of information before they and their brains have had time to develop the experiences and just the ability to think so that they can receive that information. It's kind of a lost art, of just letting a child play.
Well, I must say, I have 4, as all my listeners know, I have 4 kids of my own between the ages of 10 and 16, and they've never done organized sports, mostly because it hasn't fit in with our family, and partly because they like that free time. They enjoy free play. They, even my 2 teenage daughters, they, complain sometimes, it was such a busy week, I hardly had time to think. If we keep rushing, and some weeks are just like that with whatever limited activities we have. But I think that is important. And so, and I've talked to other parents whose kids maybe struggle with that social interaction with other kids, whether they have a diagnosed disability or if they're just a little socially awkward. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice on how to help kids get that interaction with their peers that they need if they may, maybe have a disability?
I think that a lot of things are resolved with time and maturity. Mm-hmm. And I always try to tell parents that whatever your situation you're dealing with, whether it's a diagnosed disability or just it's hard for him, quote unquote, if you will just kind of take a step back, take a breather, take a deep breath, and realize this is what's happening today with your 3-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 7-year-old, is not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be happen when they're 13, 14, and 17 and further on. I think sometimes parents just get so worked up over it that they call so much attention to it that they increase the problem unintentionally. I think that sometimes if you'll just take a step back, and if your child has a difficult time with it, don't necessarily try to force the issue on him. Continue to, if you are involved in the sports team, they don't get to not get on the team because they don't want to talk to somebody, or if whatever the activity is. But at the same time, if a child holds back, I would say for a season or 2, just let them and give them the time they need to figure it out. And my experience is more often than not, they will figure it out all by themselves. They just need a little bit of time. And we as parents need to take a deep breath and trust that they are able to grow up and mature just like everybody else.
I think that's such a great point, Janet, because I've talked to moms I know at church, at school, who, express concern about their elementary age kids. Usually it's a boy, sometimes it's a girl, but usually it's a boy who's just not really, is just one of those socially awkward kids. And it's very concerning, I think, because we hear so much in the news about kids who grow up and, don't fit in, and that's a real problem. It can be a real problem later on. And yet, so many times I give them the same advice. I'm like, I think he's probably going to be fine because I've seen this child, I've seen his interact, and he's not perfect, but my kids do socially weird stuff sometimes, and are clueless about things. And we seem to want our children to all be that social butterfly who just knows what to do and just attracts friends. And yet not everyone's like that.
No, they really aren't. And I can speak from my own personal experience. I was a kind of a nervous, anxious little kid, and it took me a long time to be comfortable in social situations. I don't think there was necessarily anything wrong with me. I just needed a little time to get there. And I also tell parents who they feel like their young child isn't as actively involved socially with the peer group, I do kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I also sort of mean it. That might be a really good thing. Because when that child is a teenager, you might wish that they were a child that held back and actively measured the situation before they jumped in. So sometimes those kids, they're not necessarily bad or wrong. I don't think any of this is bad or wrong. It's just who we are. But those same parents with the kids that did so well when they were socially as young children, they have more of a tendency to continue that pattern, and sometimes can, in their teen years, because they're teenagers, and again, they just haven't developed enough to rationally think through their choices, some of those kids jump in too quickly and find difficulty. So it kind of can go either way, but I just truly believe that most childhood things of that nature, I don't mean severe, but just, a little awkward, has a little trouble doing this, a little hesitant to do the other, most of those things, if you give your child time, you will find that they resolve themselves. And sometimes with the very best of intentions, when you push too hard and you put too much focus on it, the problem can increase instead of decrease.
Yes, and that happens with a host of parenting issues. Isn't that the truth? I often think
it's basically
it'll.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's simple physics says, quantum physics says, whatever you focus on expands. So if your focus is always on what's wrong, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that that's what expands. And so I think it's true at every level. And so I do think that it is especially with the presence of social media and the availability of information, it's a tough parenting culture. And I know it takes courage, but I always encourage parents, just hang on for a little while. Hang on and see what happens. I think it will resolve itself.
Right, and and most of the time it does. And then as you get more information, you may need to do another evaluation of what's going on. I think we're all too quick to want a diagnosis for our child.
Well, and we're too quick to want the fix when sometimes it just takes a little time.
Right. And that's not to say that there are not, children who have very serious disabilities that do need, assistance. And I'm not saying that, but all too often our kid does one thing and we immediately jump to the worst possible diagnosis or issue this child could have and act like the child has it when we really don't have enough information. I feel like and sometimes that's because of we're comparing them to other children when maybe we shouldn't. I think about this especially in elementary school, where you can have in one class, you can have 10-year-olds and you can also have 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
And depending on when their birthday is, right? You can have an older child, and if you're comparing yourself to comparing your young fourth grader, for example, to an older fourth grader, there's some grades where they grow so much, some years where their brain and stuff grow, that we kind of forget that and have to, kind of take a step back and go, well, he's a really young fifth grader.
Right.
So
the other thing too I see is there's such fear, even if it's a full-blown diagnosis, there is such fear that this is a horrible thing and they will never do well, they're doomed for life. And that's just not the case. The people in culture, in society, in history, the people that we admire the most, the people that we hold up as examples, are the people who have had to overcome. And I think we are, as a parenting culture, want to do all the overcoming for them. And in the process, we rob them of the opportunity to rise to the occasion and to overcome themselves and to be the best that they can be in the circumstances. And I just think, again, there's this fear factor there that I wish I could take back and say, whatever is in front of you, you can handle it. And it can become something that isn't a problem, but ultimately can become a gift.
Oh, no, I think that is so true. And also, I think that, no matter how our kids, learn or react to things, that's who they are. Sure, we can push them to be the best me I can be, as they say, but this whole thing that they have to fit into this, they have to have this academic, reach this academic height or do this particular, or excel, be top of their soccer team and all this kind of stuff doesn't always match up with actually who the kids are and who maybe they want to be, and being happy if they're happy and content. I always tell my children, I am not overly concerned with your grades. I want you, if you are struggling in a class and you bring home a C in that class, and that is the best you can do, and you've really struggled for that C, I'm going to be just as happy if it was a C, if it had been an A. If their teachers are telling me, we've had over the years, we've had teachers telling me, I think they belong in this kind of, this class, but it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for them. I think they can do it, but and I'm like, great, push them a little, struggle a little. I'd rather them struggle in a higher class than skate through in an easier one, even though the higher class. Just for the sake of the grade. Yeah, for the sake of the grades, right. Because like you said earlier, I think those kind of struggles really teach our kids. Now, of course, there have been an occasion where a child has been in a higher math grade, for example, and the teacher's like, I think we need to drop them down because it's too frustrating. And that's what we expect our teachers to kind of recognize, that there are going to be times when it wasn't the right decision to put them in there, and they should, maybe not take. Yeah, but it's not bad news. No, not at all. It's not bad news, and it's not doom and gloom. I always laugh when I say that we all say we want our kids to be who they are, and we champion that until the child steps out of the box and is who they are, and who they are is different from everybody else, and suddenly that difference becomes a big problem to be overcome. And again, I couldn't agree more. There are some people out there with significant challenges, and I do not in any way want to talk that down or say, oh, it's no big deal. No. But I think the overwhelming presence of all these quote-unquote learning issues and problems speaks to a culture that, we say we don't want them to be cookie cutters, but the truth of the matter is we're not comfortable when they're not. Right. And the last little piece I want to talk about is that how can we parents support one another when, maybe we have a friend, maybe it's our own child who's maybe doesn't fit that quote unquote normal mold. I can't talk today. Yeah. So how can do you have anything that we can do to kind of support that parent, that child? I think that it depends on the parent and the child. I would say for parents with children who are dealing with kind of the normal run-of-the-mill, for lack of a better way of saying it, not an extreme issue, but just one that in the time being is proving to be a problem, I think sometimes the best support we can be to those parents is to say, I think you're doing a good job, and I really, truly, I think he's going to be just fine. He looks great to me. For parents who are, in other words, don't enter the anxiety with them. Just don't. But for parents with children with true severe autism or severe learning issues, to those parents, I think you say, how can I help you?
How can I help you? If they haven't asked for your advice, if they haven't solicited your advice, we don't judge, we don't stand back. We just ask that question. And then whatever they say, we answer in terms of our own boundaries. I may not be able to bring you a dinner once a week, but I bet I could do it once a month, So it's a support system that, continues to do what you can.
That's great, Janet. And I think it's something that we should all do, no matter, who the parent is. We should encourage and support and offer that assistance, and just to be aware of those who may need help at various times.
Yes.
And to be willing to step out of our comfort zone and to do that, because we're all in this together. I know there's been a lot of talk. It does take a community to support.
I think it absolutely does. I think that it reflects the culture that doesn't really have a quote-unquote neighborhood anymore. I mean, they live in the neighborhood, but they just aren't home anymore. And, I used to laugh when my kids were little. After nap time, all the mothers would meet on the street corner in front of my house, and the kids would ride their bikes or their big wheels, and we'd have some snacks, and the kids would play and the mothers would talk. And the truth of the matter is, I could stand on the street corner with those other women, and I could laugh at the very thing, if I was in the house by myself, would reduce me to tears.
Right.
So I think sometimes you just need your community around you to help you just get past where you are and what you're dealing with, and to kind of help give perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end our show today, Janet. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Sarah.
You have been listening to You've Got This with Sarah Hammaker. I've been talking with Janet Carter about kids and free time and play and community of support. I hope you join me next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hammaker. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhammaker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.